Hello and welcome to How's That Logical? I joined Lisa Miller's Patreon, and it's really cool because she has a whole syllabus and things that we're going to be doing during the month, and I missed a couple because, well, I'm a idiot. No, I have ADHD, so I just things pop out of my head. But anyway, tonight we're going to be um, doing we're going to be watching America, brief history of the American labor movement on Bernie Sanders' YouTube channel. It's our assignment, and have a discussion. And I'm not a very good writer, so I thought what I would do is just watch it and give my take. Then I can take the transcript and I can put it into AI and see what AI thought I meant. Because when I write, it's just a jumbly mess, and people just end up having a lot of questions. But anyways, let's get on with it. And this is on 1.5 speed, so it's faster than normal because of the ums.
And thank you very much for joining us tonight for what I think is going to be an interesting and informative and very important discussion. What we are seeing in this country at a moment of mass income and wealth inequality, at a time when real wages for working families have been stagnant for almost 50 years, at a time when some 90 million Americans don't have any health insurance or they are underinsured, at a time when 45 million people are dealing with student debt, and when we have a housing crisis, when we have a whole set of crises facing the working families of this country. What we are seeing, appropriately enough, is a significant increase in labor organizing activity. We're seeing historic advances being made at Amazon.
First thing I'd like to say is I really wanted Bernie to be president. I feel like he was our last hope before we head to an inevitable crash in this country. I think this country is in the last stage of capitalism, end stage capitalism, I like to call it, and a lot of people like to call it. Oh my God, I sounded like Trump there for a second. I made up this word, end stage capitalism. Anyway, um, and I think that there was no way the establishment was going to let him. And frankly, I was worried that he was going to win because I love him. I live in Vermont. I met him. I've met him many times. I used to work at Costco, and I've met him in Burlington. He's a wonderful person. He's legit. He is definitely the person that you think he is, unless you're right wing, I guess. But he is sincere. He really cares about people. He did his own shopping. Sometimes he had a helper with him. But yeah, no, he's legit. Even when he was running for president, he used to walk around without bodyguards. He tried to take commercial airlines, and the Secret Service was telling him not to. But in Vermont, him and his wife used to drive around in their little hybrid cars. I don't remember what it's called, but it wasn't a fancy car by any means. And we used to all think to ourselves, why does he not have any Secret Service around him? But I don't know. I don't know why he didn't. But anyway, I was worried that he was going to be president because I don't think that the powers that be would have let him. I don't think he would have survived. I'll leave it at that.
We're seeing workers all over the country organized at Starbucks shops. We're seeing Apple being organized. We're seeing in my home city and in other parts of the country, residents, medical doctors, and hospitals organizing. We're seeing adjunct professors on
Hey,
college
Cornel,
campuses organizing. So what we are seeing is an upsurge
mute
in
your
blue-collar
Zoom.
organizing, in white-collar organizing, and we have seen in the last year a number of very important strikes where workers have demanded economic justice and the need for decent wages and working conditions and benefits. So that's the moment that we're in. And I think if we want to understand how we can best go forward, it's always important to understand where we came from. What is the history of the trade union movement in America? And this is something, needless to say, that the ruling class of this country does not talk about terribly often, what we owe to those people who stood up under tremendous opposition, sometimes getting shot, sometimes going on strike for months and months, scarcely any food to feed their kids. We owe them an enormous debt of gratitude, and we have to understand and acknowledge and appreciate what they have done. We have to remember that during the 1930s, in the middle of the Depression, at the early part of the Depression, labor membership had gone down from some 5 million workers to 3 million workers. That was because of the Depression. But during the 30s, under the leadership of FDR and a number of factors, we saw a huge upsurge in labor organizing. We saw enormously important strikes in steel, in auto industry, in textiles, all over our economy. Workers stood up and they fought back. And right now we may, I hope, be at that moment where working people understand that we need an economy that works for all, not just the few, that it is absurd that during the pandemic, when thousands and thousands of workers died, so-called essential workers, because they had to go to work, they produced the food that we needed, they did the transportation, they worked in hospitals, they died. And yet billionaires during that period saw a $2 trillion increase in their wealth. So I think you are seeing a rising up in this country against this kind of injustice and the demand for decent wages and benefits. And let me start off the program by just reading, I think, a very good quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that he gave, and people don't know this, and I know we'll talk about it tonight. King worked very closely with labor unions in the civil rights struggle and was a strong advocate of labor unions. This is what he said on October 7th, 1965. He said, and I quote, "The labor movement was the principal force that transformed misery and despair into hope and progress. Out of its bold struggles, economic and social reform gave birth to unemployment insurance, old age pensions, government relief for the destitute, and above all, new wage levels that meant not mere survival, but a tolerable life. The captains of industry did not lead this transformation. They resisted it until they were overcome. When in the 30s the wave of union organization crested over the nation, it carried to secure shores not only itself but the whole society. Civilization began to grow in the economic life of man, and a decent life with a sense of security and dignity became a reality rather than a distant dream." In other words, unions fulfill many important goals. Obviously, when you have a contract, you can negotiate.
Just so you know, I'm going to be I'm looking at the assignment. Let's see. Do I have a left? I think I do. Play left? Yes, I do. Okay, so the discussion, I'm supposed to keep in mind who are the key actors in the movement and what are their roles? What similarities do you see between the time period in the source and today? What differences do you see between the time period in the source and today? What? Okay. Yep. What lessons can be learned from this era of movement building and applied to today? So I'm going to try to keep this in mind as best as I possibly can. Yep.
For decent wages and working conditions, and that's terribly important. But it does something else. It says to the world that you are more than just a vassal for your boss. Your boss can't do anything
Vassal.
he or she wants to you. You have certain rights. You have certain dignity. And that you and your fellow workers are going to stand together in solidarity to fight for a decent life. And what unions did, and we'll discuss this tonight, is not only engaged in strong collective bargaining, as Dr. King points out. You want to know why you have Social Security, why we have Medicare, why we have Medicaid, why we have a 40-hour work week, why we have time and a half for overtime. This didn't come from the employers. They didn't come from the corporate world.
Socialism.
They came from the struggles of workers. So it's important to know where we came from if we want to know where we are going. And tonight I'm delighted to be joined by 4 individuals who are extremely knowledgeable, have written a whole lot, taught a whole lot about American labor history. They are Tobey Higbie, who is a professor of history and labor studies at UCLA. Dana Caldemeyer, who is an assistant professor of history at Alabama A&M University in Huntsville. Kent Wong, who is the director of the UCLA Labor Center, where he teaches courses in labor studies and Asian American studies. Dr. Cornel West, who is a philosopher, author, activist, and a professor of philosophy and Christian practice at Union Theological Seminary, and holds the title of Professor Emeritus at Princeton. So let us begin with Tobey Higbie. Dr. Higbie, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Bernie. It's a real pleasure to be part of this important conversation. I've been teaching labor history at UCLA for the past 15 years, and our students today are the most eager I've ever seen so far to learn about organizing, both the history and the practical applications. And as you know, the share of Americans who say they support unions and would want to be in a union is much higher.
Keep in mind, this was streamed 2 years ago. It's important.
Than the share of Americans who actually are in a union. And that's because it's extremely difficult to organize unions in the United States. That's something we have in common today with the American past. It was always been quite difficult, except for a relatively brief period. So even with all this great, incredible organizing going on today, at Starbucks, Amazon, elsewhere, there's still this huge gap between those who want to be represented by unions and those who are. And everyone's trying to figure out, as you suggest, how do we fill that gap? How do we make unions grow big enough to be a countervailing power to big business? And what can we learn from the past, if anything, to help us today? And to answer that question, there's a lot of different ways to do that, but I'm just, for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to go back to the 1920s, which was a boom time for business, but also a very bad time for unions. It was a time for unions. They were divided by race, by ethnicity, by gender, by skill, by immigration status. And they had very little influence, frankly, in the central industries. They were a non-player in the central industries of the American economy. So a little bit like today, the dark times where unions were very weak in the 1920s, but that was also the period where organizers were beginning to piece together the strategies that would help them break through in the 1930s and 40s. So somebody I admire from this period is named Rose Pesotta. She was a Jewish immigrant garment worker from what today is Ukraine. She was a strong woman working in the macho movement culture of trade unionism. She was a creative organizer who took on fiercely anti-union employers, and she won. Pesotta had very little formal schooling, which was common for workers in the 1920s. But she saw the labor movement itself as a kind of educational process. As she told fellow workers and organizers in 1927, there isn't one working class, she said. She was explaining that people are divided into sometimes hostile camps. The movement has to organize in every different community on its own terms before they can bring people together. And she brought that idea to Los Angeles in 1933, a city that was fiercely, notoriously anti-union town, and she led a general strike of garment workers. That workforce was divided between white workers and Spanish-speaking Mexican and Mexican-American workers, between Anglo and Jewish workers, between men and women. But she found a way to bring them together to fight, to learn that they were better fighting together than against one another. So that unionization is like an educational process. A. Philip Randolph, the leader of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, which in the 1920s and 30s was the largest African-American union in the United States, made a similar point. He likened the normal mindset of workers to that of a pedestrian walking on a crowded New York City sidewalk. And he said that, when you're walking like that, basically you don't really see all the other people. You just find your way naturally, trying not to bump into anybody to get to your destination. And what he thought when he was organizing the March on Washington movement, originally in the 1940s, and then it came to fruition in the 1960s for jobs and freedom, to fight against discrimination in the workplace. He thought we have to put people into motion to get them to change the way they see each other. And they would then recalibrate what they thought they owed to each other as fellow human beings. So again, the movement was an educational process that would change people's mindset. And my point is that when we focus, sometimes we like to focus on the big upsurges of labor unity, like the 1930s or in the 1960s. But sometimes we get fooled into thinking that workers are somehow naturally united. They aren't. Organizers brought them together, little by little, preparing the ground culturally, psychologically for the big breakthroughs. America has always been a multiracial society, a multiracial working class divided by white supremacy, by machismo, by skill and education, by religion and ideology, more and more today by citizenship status. There isn't one natural working class. As Pesotta said, solidarity isn't automatic. It takes work. That's what organizers do, and that pays off big time. Yeah, sure thing.
Assistant professor of history at Alabama A&M. Dana, thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. For those of you all who don't know, I study Gilded Age history, which is basically history in the 1800s, the later part of the 1800s, and the Progressive Era, which kind of goes forward into the 20th century. And I kind of want to echo what Tobey was talking about here whenever he mentions the challenges that people faced whenever they were trying to organize and really establish organized labor that would kind of have success. In the United States in the 1860s, 1870s going forward, labor unions were not very strong. They were just kind of starting out. They were trying to figure out how to really function. And they had so many challenges that they needed to overcome. Workers worked in terrible working conditions, easily lost their lives, and nobody really thought twice about it. I've seen instances where companies had mine explosions, and they knew that there was a good chance that workers were still alive, but they decided that it cost too much money to stage a rescue effort. And so they decided to just seal up the mine, declare everybody dead, and reopen a new mine elsewhere. And of course, the families of these workers are irate. They have family that's probably still alive there, but the bottom line at the time was profit, and it just wasn't profitable for them to rescue workers whenever they could easily hire someone else. And so labor unions saw that this was something that they needed to address, but trying to figure out how to address that, how to establish a clear movement was a bit of a challenge. And so they're really kind of building it up from basically nothing in the Gilded Age, trying to handle working conditions, wages. Some people were working completely for free in the Gilded Age. They weren't earning cash. They were getting coupons or getting credit. And some people just were working for free in the hopes that eventually they could get a paying job with a company. These are conditions that we would think today are just completely insane.
Well, one of the things about back then was we didn't have as many distractions. I mean, that's a huge deal. I mean, to get that drip of dopamine just sitting down and binge watching a Netflix series. I mean, back then you didn't have that kind of distraction, and you didn't have that kind of escapism. And that's one of the biggest problems nowadays is everybody's just distracted as hell, really. I mean, I'm excited to watch a series tonight. I could be working on this or working on something to get the word out or trying to organize, but no, I'm going to watch a show tonight. This right here took a lot of effort for me to set this up and actually do this. So, yeah, that's one of the biggest problems right now.
But that was life in the Gilded Age. And so whenever unions formed, you had organizations like the National Labor Union, the Knights of Labor, what was then called the American Federation of Labor. These guys in the Gilded Age were really trying to figure out how they could bring about this change. And ultimately, they had a ton of problems that they needed to overcome with that. It wasn't just racism and nativism among the workers themselves. People were divided on what kind of goals they needed to achieve first, because you can't achieve it all at once whenever you don't have a clear movement going yet. So prioritization was a big problem. And then, of course, corporate and government, just lack of support across the board for unionization and outright hostility became something that was really difficult for unions to overcome. And so I know
One of the hardest things I think also nowadays is how do I put this? The right wing and the left wing, MAGA, the libtards, whatever you want to call all the different groups, they all need to get together and work together to. I'm just going to get that pause out of. I need. Sorry, shoot, that was a really weird pause. But they all need to get together and fight the rich, basically. But one of the biggest problems I have is it's hard to work with somebody. It's hard to be near someone that's like super racist or a bigot or a misogynist. Like, it's hard to work with them. I don't know how to do that. That's really difficult for me. And I think it's difficult for everybody. It's also difficult for MAGA. I mean, MAGA looks at us and goes, oh, these soft libtards, us being left, if you're left. You soft libtards, we don't, you guys are destroying America because you want to make everything free and you want to let all the immigrants in. Of course, they've been brainwashed to think that immigrants are the biggest problems in the world. So all that together makes it hard for us to work together. I mean, I've talked to people in MAGA and I'll be like, hey, don't you hate the way that the rich are rigging the system? And they'll always say George Soros. And I'll be like, there's a bunch of people on the right also that do that. It's not just George Soros. It's Elon Musk, is the biggest example there is right now of someone that is influencing politics with money. Okay. But they hate us and we hate them. And that's why we're fighting. And so, and that's the way the elite want it. So how do we get past that?
whenever people talk about the Gilded Age, there are a couple strikes that always kind of stick out. Things like the railroad strikes or the garment workers strikes that yielded a lot of success. The United Mine Workers of America had a great strike in the early 20th century where they were kind of able to finally sit at the table and negotiate with corporations.
And also, I don't mean to keep interrupting this woman, but things are finally coming into my head. I think she's sparking my brain. But anyway, also with social media, you know more about people than you should know. I had a lot of people in high school that were friends of mine. Now, a lot of them, I think of them as racist, bigots, misogynist scumbags. I'm sorry, but I do, because that is what a scumbag is you put those things over. If you can describe a person that way, they're a scumbag. Their biggest problem with us is that we're woke. What's the opposite of woke? Asleep? You educated elite as opposed to uneducated? Like, I get how they think that we're being so pompous when we say things and they're just like, your words are your words are confusing. You're just saying stuff, you educated. I don't know why I'm using I shouldn't be doing accents. I'll try not to. It's hard. But yeah, like, I know so much more about my classmates than I should. And when they throw up a Trump sign or a Trump supporter sign, or they say something ridiculous they heard from Alex Jones or Marjorie Taylor Greene or something like that, it's really hard not to be like, Oh, you're a douchebag. I completely forgot about. I had no idea you were a douchebag. I forgot douchebags were real. I'm in Vermont. I thought everybody here was just super, super progressive and super, super like caring and loving, and because when you walk around out in Vermont, everybody's nice. But if you go to social media, you'll be like, that nice guy that helped me, he's a racist. Holy shit! Look at the post he put up. That's insane. And that's just crazy. And that makes it really hard to work with them too. Well, that is what makes it hard to work with them. But we know too much about people now. When they were in the railroads before, they were just like clank, clank, clank. This job sucks. We don't get paid enough. You're right. By the way, just so you know, I'm a racist. Well, I hate racists. That didn't happen. They just talked about the problem. They didn't get into it. Maybe they did get into it eventually, but it was subtle. Like somebody might say an off-color thing or whatever. But it wasn't like you couldn't like go boop on their nose and read their entire profile and look at all their posts and go, oh, I know all about you now. I hate you. You just be like, Frank is right. He said that we don't get paid enough. We work too hard. I agree with Frank. Now you don't know that he beats his wife, but you do know that Frank's right about the problem with your job. And so you can join up. But now we know everything about everybody. Social media is good for organizing, but it's not good for being cohesive.
But it's important to also kind of
I apologize to this woman for keep interrupting her.
look at those failures that they also endured during the Gilded Age and kind of remember that the problems that we face today are actually a lot more similar to what they were facing in the Gilded Age than they are different. And so that's the big takeaway that I kind of want to hammer here, because very few people are familiar with the movements of the Gilded Age. And so it's kind of important to get that big kind of context to understand what's going on here. They had so much that they needed to achieve. And sometimes it seemed like it was just too much to do all at once. And it was really easy for workers to get demoralized from it.
All right. With that, thank you, Dana. Let's go to Kent Wong, who's at the UCLA Labor Center. Kent, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Bernie. It's great to be with you, and we appreciate your leading voice and activism for economic justice. It was so great to hear my friends Tobey and Dana to talk about the rich history of the U.S. working class and the U.S.
Keep in mind, this is sped up to 1.5. These people don't talk like this.
The rich history of the U.S. labor movement. And I want to bring it up to speed in terms of what is going on today. I teach labor studies and ethnic studies here at UCLA. But prior to that, I was a union attorney for the Service Employees International Union in Los Angeles at a time of dynamic change, when we had a new working class that was emerging and that was organizing for power. So my union helped to bring about the Justice for Janitors campaign that reinvigorated the energy of the immigrant working class of Los Angeles and led to unprecedented victories in organizing the janitorial industry. We saw the hotel workers rising forward as a...
Sorry, he's so intense when he's this fast. I don't want to slow it down, but it's like super intense. Okay, shh, calm down.
A force for change and progress. We saw the home care organizing campaign launched by Black women that successfully organized 74,000 home care workers, mainly women of color. And today, more than 400,000 home care workers in the state of California are under union contract because of the heroism of these Black women who launched this campaign. And so the voice of labor today is growing stronger. Workers across the country are organizing in unprecedented numbers, and the positive image of unions is at a 50-year high. So this is a huge opportunity to advance change and to advance social justice unionism. We have seen in Los Angeles that immigrant workers have been at the forefront of some of the most significant organizing victories that we have seen. And we see a bankrupt immigration system where 11 million people are locked in an apartheid-style system where their undocumented status denies them basic human rights and human dignities. We call these workers essential workers because they plant and pick the fruits and vegetables we eat. We call them essential workers because they work in our warehouses and in our fast food restaurants and in our hotels. And yet they are treated anything but as essential workers. They are treated as disposable workers subjected to corporate greed. We have billionaires who are making billions in profits during the pandemic, and yet working people are suffering to barely make a living. So this is the current context that we are in, when we need to step up and organize like never before, bring unions to the American workplace to democratize the working class and to democratize the workplace that is any...
Sorry, that pause was weird. I feel like things aren't going to really kick off until it gets worse. I saw a statistic where it said 80%. Wait a minute. %% of 80% of Americans only own 7% of the wealth. That's insane. And this is streamed 2 years ago. Trump's going to do more corporate tax cuts, and probably a lot more cuts that we haven't even heard about. When that 7% goes down farther, when the middle class and the middle upper class start getting affected, or people that think they're middle class and middle upper class, when those people start getting affected is when you're going to start seeing people in the streets. And when you see people in the streets with the dictator that we're about to have in office, who has made it clear he will not tolerate protests, and he sends in the National Guard, those peaceful protests are going to turn kind of ugly, because what happens, as we saw in Gaza, what happens when you crush somebody, crush a population, when you crush them to a point where they have nothing else to lose except their lives and their families' lives, is they get really angry and really, really mean. And they do crazy things. Because what else can you do if there's nowhere to go? If there's no place to go, what do? You might, I don't know, start offing some people. I mean, honestly, I don't understand. That's one of the things. If I were one of those billionaires, I'd be like, dude, we got to start giving back, because I don't know. I mean, obviously we could just leave and go to another country or something, but it's going to get dangerous. I mean, how do you not know that? How do you not know that?
Anything but democratic. So I am filled with tremendous hope and energy. Young workers, workers of color, women workers are leading the charge to transform the U.S. labor movement and to take on the ugly corporate greed that dominates so much of our society today.
Very much. And last but certainly not least is Cornel West, who is a professor of philosophy at Union Theological Seminary. Cornel, thanks so much for being with us. Cornel, you're...
Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right?
Whoa, yeah.
Oh, indeed. It's always a blessing to be with Brother Bernie and to be here with my distinguished colleagues, with Brother Tobey and Sister Dana and Brother Kenneth said. I think it's so very, very important. One of the great paradoxes of our moment is that we're right on the brink of a renaissance of the labor movement, and at the same time witnessing escalating neo-fascist forces, not just against workers' rights, but women's rights and voting rights of Black people and immigrant rights. And so we have to be able to keep both of these ideas in our mind at the same time and retain the ability to envision a better future. And I think anytime you talk about the labor movement, you're talking about three different levels. You're talking about new ways of seeing, which is both a moral way of orienting yourself in the world. You have to be able to see working class social misery along with the misery of other people. You have to be able to see class struggle and class conflict, to see corporate greed and its connection to that social misery. But you need analytical lens too. An analytical lens is ways of trying to understand the truth of the suffering. How does the suffering come about? How do we understand the ways in which power operates? So you got moral lens, you got analytical lens, but last but not least, institutional lens, which is to say, you're looking at the world in a certain way as it connects to the organizational ties that you have that lead you to engage in certain kind of courageous action. So you need all three of these levels simultaneously. And talking about the trade union movement, this is very important, because the trade union movement too often is viewed as some kind of ghettoized activity, isolated from other ways of resisting against domination, other ways of resisting any kind of corporate power, patriarchal power, white supremacist power, homophobic power, transphobic power, any kind of power of the status quo. And part of our challenge is, how do we attempt to highlight all three levels of these new ways of seeing and acting, mediated with deep feelings of solidarity, given what is in place right now, which is deeply reactionary ways of conceiving the world, Republican Party, and liberal, neoliberal ways of viewing the world too often in the Democratic Party, that don't want to talk about corporate power, don't want to talk about corporate greed, don't want to talk about militarism abroad, don't want to talk about the most progressive voices, figures, institutions in the labor movement. And so it's a matter of mapping where we are at present, and most importantly, as was noted with all three of these very important voices and figures, understanding that hope is a verb as much as a virtue. You've got to...
One of the things that really worries me is we need a leader. As much as I love Bernie, he had a lot of characteristics that could probably help lead. Like, MAGA has a leader. Trump, who works really well for them. And Republicans are generally pretty good at getting behind whoever they end up picking. Oh, they're having a little problem right now, but generally that's what they're good. The left isn't very good at getting behind someone. If you find a good leader and they say you have 10 items on your list of things that you want to have happen through legislation, and they believe in 9 of them, the left always nitpicks and goes, well, I believe in 9 of the things that he says, but that one thing, oh, that's a deal breaker. And it seems like the left does that a lot. So we need like a leader. And like Cornel West is a pretty inspiring guy, but he hasn't been able to do it. He was running as a third party. I mean, who do we get that's going to be inspirational enough to rally all the fickle people on the left that are just going to be like, you know what? Let's just get behind this guy and do it. But they can't. They're always bitching about the little, like, well, I like what he said about the labor unions. I like what he said about environment, but I don't know. His take on foreign policy is pretty weak, and that's a deal breaker for me. Or everything but Gaza. Everything but Gaza, even though the right wing is the same as Gaza, the same on Gaza. Like, how do you coalesce the left? We're all a bunch of bitches. We bitch all the time about everything. Cornel West, I mean, I think he's pretty cool. I don't really know much about him that I don't like. But I bet there's a bunch of leftists out there that are just like, no, you don't understand about Cornel West. And they would list something and I'd be like, oh yeah, I guess that is really bad. But what about all these good things? Anyway.
Stay in motion. What kind of organization are you working with? What kind of analytical lens are you using? What kind of moral? And I would even add spiritual power, because the role of the arts in the working class movement is something that we also want to at least acknowledge and to know. Brother Kent was saying before how now there's new labor studies centers all around California. That's important in terms of the public discourse, the academic discourse, the intellectual discourse, the analytical lens. Crucial. And that's a result of what? Labor movement pushing through on the intellectual front. Same would be true on the artistic front. Same would be true on the political organizational front. So it's a blessing to be here, and I look forward to the questions and queries. Always can't wait to learn and laugh and re-engage.
Well, thank you so much. Let me start off with a kind of a softball question, but an important question. Historically, what were the conditions in the 20s, before that, in the 30s, today, that made workers want to join the union? Why is today, as I think maybe Tobey said, are unions more popular now than they have been for many, many decades? So why do people want to participate in the union movement historically, and what do we learn from that? Who wants?
I didn't understand the question. He said today, and that really threw me. So the question is, what made people in the 20s want to join labor movements? I think.
To jump in on that one.
Bernie, I'll jump in quickly. I think to echo what Dr. West said, was hope is a lot to it, because obviously in the Great Depression, people were suffering greatly. But when the labor movement was able to lay out.
By the way, Bernie, if you need help with your backgrounds and and getting people in frame and stuff, just please reach out. I would love to help you. I live in the same state as you. Okay, because wow.
A potential path forward that seemed actionable and could work. It gave people a lot more hope. So that was the little victories, like we're seeing today. Those little victories give people hope, and it leads more people into the movement. That's what I would add to that.
Dana, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can jump in. One thing that I've seen in the 1930s, but then also before that, is just sheer desperation. People saying, what do I have to lose? What I have right now isn't great. I don't know what else to do. I might as well try this. And so it really is, there is a hope that, maybe this is going to be the thing that kind of gets them out of the troubles that they face. But it's also just this, the sheer hardships that people are enduring that kind of get them to say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and take a chance with this anyway.
I also want to bring in the current reality. We are entering the 3rd year of a pandemic. Over 1 million people in the United States have died, and millions of people throughout the world. But
keep in mind, this was streamed 2 years ago.
But let us be clear that the suffering is not equally felt. And if you look at the impact on working class communities, if you look at the impact on immigrants, if you look at the impact of communities of color, it has been devastating. And how could it be that you would have a private space race being led by the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks of the world, who with their obscene wealth, instead of using that resource.
Kent, I'm from the future. It gets fucking worse. Way worse.
To share the vaccine with developing countries, use it to burn through billions of dollars in a private space race. This is the obscenity of corporate greed in action. And I think that a new generation of workers in the United States understand that corporations are not representing their interests and that essential workers are being.
It's so depressing that this was streamed 2 years ago and they're so hopeful. And I mean, I guess we had some positives during the Biden administration with the labor movements and stuff. So maybe they're right back then. I don't know, but whew, I feel really bad for all these guys in the past. I bet they didn't think Trump was going to win again. And let's be clear. Trump's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the donors and the rich and money in politics. Trump's a big problem, but he's not the biggest problem. Although he is best buds with Elon now, so it's kind of all in one now. Whatever.
Treated as dispendable workers, and that for young workers today, they have a very poor opportunity to find a good job because they don't have access to good union jobs that in generations past created the middle class in this country. So in that spirit, more workers are turning towards unionization.
I think hope is always something to be understood in relation to what William James called live options. And once certain options are viewed as no longer able to deliver or exhausted, people look for some other options. And we're at a moment now where it's clear that the neoliberal option is not delivering. And if the only option is the right-wing option, moving toward the neo-fascist option, then they'll opt for it, not so much because they believe in everything that the gangster Trump believes or whatever, but they're looking for an alternative. See, the Brother Bernie was an option, and so many were open to birth, so that all of us as human beings are in contact with various limited options. And if the left, if progressives cannot provide a live option, which is exactly what the labor movement in LA was able to do, exactly what those labor studies programs more and more are going to be doing in California, we need it on a national level. And so in that sense, it's not just a question of all of us coming together, multiracial, multigender. Of course we need that, but it's got to be concrete enough that it's perceived as a live option, given the fact that what's in place now is simply colossal failure for so many poor and working people.
I watched the Kyle Kalinske show, and he was saying Jon Stewart would be a good choice. I get what he's doing. Like, maybe we need a celebrity that everybody can get behind. I feel like Tom Hanks would be a better choice because, like, everybody likes Tom Hanks. And when you find someone that doesn't like Tom Hanks, you know there's something wrong with him. Like, what do you have against Tom Hanks? But like, I don't know. I get Jon Stewart. I'm not a fan of Jon Stewart. So that's kind of, I mean, believe me, I would love to see Jon Stewart run because, wow, he would run for president. He would definitely be interesting to watch, and he would be like our Donald Trump, because that's what we need on our side being the left. The left needs someone that is charismatic and entertaining and has their shit together as far as policies. I guess Jon Stewart would be a good choice. Now that I think about it a little bit more, just not my choice. I mean, I'd have to think about it, but
one of the points that all of you have made is there has been throughout this history and throughout our history, and I would argue today, a level of desperation and pain and suffering that the ruling class and the media do not acknowledge. I mean, right now, I don't know how many folks out there know that in the richest country in the history of the world, where during the pandemic, billionaire class, fewer than 1,000, saw their wealth increase by $2 trillion. You got half of our workforce living paycheck to paycheck. People can't afford to go to a doctor. You got 500,000 people who are homeless, on and on and on. In other words, the first thing we've got to do when we talk about the need to build the union movement is to recognize the kind of desperation and suffering that exists today.
one of the things that I wish Bernie would do more is explain when he says stuff like that. Like he does it a lot. He does it a lot when he's talking in Congress, when he's when he's doing those talks where he has nobody behind him and he just talks for 45 minutes and says a lot of amazing stuff. But a lot of times he just says a lot of things like this, like the 1%, the income inequality. But I think what he forgets to say, and I think one of the problems with Bernie, I love Bernie, don't get me wrong, but he forgets to explain it to people. Like the reason why in the pandemic, as far as I understand it, that income inequality became so bad was because people lost jobs, they lost businesses, they lost homes, they lost loved ones, they had to sell things to pay for medical bills, they had to sell things to pay for food. They lost a lot of stuff. The only people that could buy that stuff were the rich. So if you have a house and you're like, we're fucked, we need to sell our house, you're not going to get another person on your economic level to buy the house. It's going to be somebody that has a lot of money, like that has powder dry, as they call it, that has cash somewhere. And they're going to buy that house and they're going to buy it cheap because you have to sell. Okay. That is a big deal. Or say like your house gets foreclosed on. If you have a foreclosure, you're just screwed, right? But the bank has a house now that it can sell at any price it wants. It's going to try to make its money back, but if it can't sell it, it's going to sell it to someone for cheaper. And I'll tell you what, the ultra rich, the billionaires, I heard somebody say this once. They're not customers of banks. They're clients of banks, meaning they have a number that they can call and talk to anyone they want at the bank, even the head of the bank. And and because of the way our system of credit is in this country, you don't have enough money to buy anything if you're a regular person. You just don't. And if you try to do credit, first of all, they're not going to let you get a loan if your credit's not good enough. If your credit's just good enough, they'll give you a loan, but they're going to give you an interest rate, meaning the money that you're going to have to pay back is going to be much greater at the end of it all than someone that has a lot of money. So like when Elon Musk, if he wanted to buy a $50 million house, he wouldn't just sell his stock and buy a $50 million house. He would go to one of his bank friends and say, hey, I want to buy a $50 million house. And they'd be like, we'd be happy to help. Great. What kind of interest rate can you give me? How about 89% interest, 0.89%, not 1, not 3.75, not 8.75, 0.85% interest rate. And so then he takes that money, that's a loan, and buys the house. By the way, because it's a loan, it's tax-free. You don't pay taxes, income tax on a loan. It's not considered income, it's considered a debt. So now he owns a house that's worth that he bought for $50 million and waits 2 years, 5 years, sells it for $75 million and then pays back the loan. I don't know how that part works, but what I do know is that they don't spend their own money, the rich. And so they just, bought real estate and artwork and anything that the suffering people that didn't have any money during the pandemic sold or had to sell or lost, the rich purchased it, which is why their wealth went up so high. I hope that explains it.
Way back when, you had children working in factories, not going to school. Of course, you had the incredible racism and the sexism that existed. Women couldn't get the jobs they needed. The African-American community was living in apartheid. That's part of our history, which we have got to discuss and we have got to understand. All right, so let me now ask the next question. What have been the successes of the trade union movement? How is America today better because of the struggles of workers and their unions? Who wants to take a shot at that one?
I can dive in here. I think some of the biggest things that you see really are things that we take for granted today. Things like safer working conditions, an 8-hour workday, minimum wage. These are things that organized labor had fought for generations.
Yeah. The right wing don't even know. They're like, oh, TGIF, thank God it's Friday. Well, you bitch about socialism. The people that did the labor movements, they're the reason why you have a 5-day week. They're the reason why you have an 8-hour workday. They're the reason why you have benefits. But you bitch about this socialism like it's communism, and communism is dictatorship. But oh God, don't get me stuck. Don't get me started on that. But you have to understand that the things that you enjoy, that you maybe not even enjoy, maybe you just like, you do bitch about the fact that you have to work 5 days a week. Well, you used to have to work 7 days a week for 12 hours, and your kid was there too, and he's 12. Okay. Socialist programs, socialist movements are what made those things happen. Your holidays, your days off, your vacations, your sick pay, all that stuff came from evil socialism. We're not talking about socialists aren't talking about turning us into a full socialist economy. Well, some people are, but ideally you want capitalism with a lot of regulations so that the rich people can't just fuck everybody over and take everything for little. And one of the reasons why we like that people don't have jobs is because if you do have a job and you're like, well, I don't like my job, so I'm going to start a union. Oh yeah, you're going to start a union? Well, you're fired, because there's plenty of people out there that'll take your job. If you don't have a lot of people unemployed, you don't have the leverage to make your employees fearful. What industry is there that you couldn't, if someone quit or got fired, that you couldn't just go find somebody else to work at it? Well, I guess technically field work for like picking the produce and stuff, which we're going to find out about soon, that the Americans don't want to do that when all the immigrants are deported. But anyway, yeah, so we have to realize that I think I actually made my point.
By the time we actually secured them.
Talk a little bit about, because I don't think a lot of people know this, talk about the conditions that workers worked under back in the 20s or earlier than that.
Oh, good. We're going to see if anything I just said is accurate. Because I have a bad memory, so let's see if I was correct at all.
You talked about improved safety conditions. Well, what existed before?
Safety, right.
Oh, in places, there would be no guardrails in factory. You could lose a limb, you could lose fingers, you could lose your life. Nothing there to make sure that mines wouldn't catch fire or explode. Children would come out of factories completely maimed, and nobody really seemed to care about that, especially in the Gilded Age. And you had activists like Mother Jones, who really kind of took this to the public and really kind of pushed the issue to kind of make people aware. But if people hadn't been there to really kind of call the nation's attention to what was going on in the workplaces, these problems would have lasted a lot longer. Workers would work for an entire pay period, but then once payday came, the company would say, well, we're not going to pay you this time, so you're just going to have to continue working, and then if you're still here at the next pay period, then we'll pay you for the past 2 pay periods, and if you don't like it, then you can leave, but you're not going to get your paycheck now. And workers had no recourse for that. And so those are some of the problems that workers faced as far as conditions in the workplace.
I completely agree, Dana, with all of those conditions that you cited, and many of those were topics of organizing and reasons that unions formed and joined to improve better wages and better working conditions. The reality, however, is that everything that you described exists today in the US workplace. We have farm workers in the Central Valley of California who are poisoned by pesticides in the fields because the growers have no interest in spending extra money to find clean ways of providing safety for the workers. We have warehouse workers today who are working in 110, 100-degree temperatures for Amazon. One of my students at UCLA, his father died from being exposed to COVID on the job at Amazon, and Amazon did everything they could to cover up the responsibility and to avoid notifying his coworkers about COVID outbreaks within the warehouses. Here in Los Angeles, we have the largest sweatshops in the country, where garment workers to this day are working less than minimum wage to produce clothes that we wear every day. So these, unfortunately, are not conditions that are in the past. These are conditions today that US corporations are directly responsible for, and they refuse to take responsibility for the unsafe, unhealthy, sub-minimum wage conditions that exist in America today.
All right, let me follow Kent's point. By getting into the role of corporate America, one of the things that we are seeing today, and of course this is not new, is that even when workers are successful, as in the case of Amazon in Staten Island, in the case of Starbucks shops all over the country, they are successful in organizing a union. What the company refuses to do is to negotiate a first contract. And they hope that by stalling and stalling and stalling, workers will become demoralized in companies like Starbucks or Amazon. The turnover rate is enormously high. So they hope that the momentum for a union will dissipate. If you guys could for a moment talk about, and in extreme cases back in the 20s, workers were shot down when they stood up and fought back. Right? Colorado, they were mowed down. You got the National Guard coming in. You got goons. Famous picture of Walter Reuther at the UAW being beaten up by a bunch of company goons. Talk about the role that corporations played and play in fighting the workers' constitutional right to organize a union. Who wants to jump in?
That's a big one, Bernie, and it's been going on for a long time. So let me just say that I think, when the National Labor Relations Act was passed in 1935, it was in certain ways revolutionary in the sense that it put the federal government on the side of collective bargaining for the first time. Labor unions had been sort of illegal in a sense, and that's why they were so subjected to police violence, but also judges passing injunctions to prevent them from organizing. And,
Yeah. And so the reason why those people were able to form unions was because they had a group of people that wanted to form a union. Okay. What they're saying, I believe, is at the time, if you tried to form a union, you might be at risk of dying or being unalived by goons or people that were there to like basically intimidate you. And they wouldn't just intimidate you, they might unalive you. Well, if you listen to Trump, he's back to remember there was a thing where I think Elon Musk was on Trump's podcast, or Trump was on Elon Musk's podcast, I think. Thank God Trump doesn't have a podcast yet. Anyway, and they were laughing because Elon Musk was saying that these people wanted to go on strike, and then so he just fired them. And then Trump was like, ha ha ha, that's what I like about you. These are the people that are in charge right now. So if you think that they're not going to, and they're also the same people that are saying we're not going to tolerate protests, okay? So if they're not going to tolerate protests and they're all for firing people if they protest for unions, put that together. We're headed back to that. We're headed back to the period of time where you might get unalived for trying to start a union, trying to organize, okay? It might sound hyperbolic, but it's not. And it's not me saying that. Just go listen to fucking Trump talk. He talks like that. You say people say, "Oh, I don't think Trump will be able to do that." Why? This time around, he's got people on his side this time. He's only picking people that are loyal to him, and he's got the House and the Senate to do so. And let's face it, he has the Supreme Court as well. So if you think that this time around isn't going to be different than last time, because I hear a lot of people that say, well, what happened last time? We didn't lose our democracy. Well, we almost did with the January 6th, but let's just say this time around is different. He's got all the wings of government on his side this time. Okay?
thug violence, kind of fascistic violence. But one of the things that happened in the 1970s and 80s as the federal government began withdrawing support for the labor board was that employers learned anew how to manipulate the system. And so that's why we've come to a point where even if you can struggle your way to getting a contract or a union, winning a union election, it's very difficult to get to that first contract because employers figured out a way to game the system, and they can get away with it through their legal teams to delay for sometimes 10 years, fire people who are organizers, and maybe 10 years later, they'll get their jobs back. Well, that won't work. You need to get your job back right away.
Instead of goons, they hire lawyers and consultants, right?
Different style, I guess.
Well, get ready for the goons to come back, because that's what I'm telling you. That's what I think's about to happen. I think they're going to try to save money and just go to the goons. And maybe you think I'm nuts for thinking that, but if corporations, their whole point is to save money, and where the country's about to be run by Elon Musk and fucking Donald Trump, you don't think they're going to try to save money by going to goons instead of lawyers? fucking, I'm laughing because I don't know what else to do. It's awful. It's fucking ridiculous.
To jump in on the role that the corporate world has historically played in trying to prevent workers from organizing. Cornel?
Yeah, I want to accent something that we did have in the past in the labor movement, working class culture that we don't have now, which is we had labor newspapers, we had labor clubs, we had labor at the world through the lens of what was happening to labor. There used to be labor pages in the bourgeois and the mainstream newspapers. Now it's just business pages. So the perspective of how you see the world is pro-capitalist, pro-business, pro-greed, pro the very things that we're fighting against. And this is also true in the music. It's also true in the social life. So what we need here is to accent ways.
By the way, I have a podcast, the Human Happy Hour podcast, and we tried to get Cornel West on our show. Speaking of capitalism, he charges a lot of money to go on a show. I was under this weird delusion that these people would just go on podcasts, but no, it costs a lot to get Cornel West. I'm sure Bernie didn't have to pay anything, but anyway, maybe.
In which corporate media don't allow our fellow citizens to look at the world through the lens of what is happening to precious working people. And that's,
by the way, that's okay. Cornel West is allowed to make money for speaking. That's nothing wrong with that. I was a little surprised. That's all. I was probably just being naive.
this is why.
Washington Post. It's not CNN. This is us.
But see, now, I mean, there's some organizations out there, but it's so very important to accent.
I think somebody else is in charge of Bernie's mute. I think someone else is controlling that. I feel like he should just be allowed to talk whenever he wants.
It seems to me.
Which I find amusing. You got real wages in this country have been more or less stagnant for the last 50 years, despite a huge increase in technology and productivity. You got, as I mentioned earlier, half the people living paycheck to paycheck, people falling behind. Have you ever seen the corporate media talk about the phrase, working class? How do you have a working class if it's not even acknowledged to exist? How do you have a ruling class if nobody acknowledges that reality? You got three people owning more wealth than the bottom half of America. They run our government, they run the economy, but we don't have a ruling class, right? I guess not. All right, my rant.
I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you, Bernie, that there is a very deliberate and conscious effort on the part of the corporate elite.
That's another thing. The right wing always talks about the deep state. There's not a secret organization. They're out in the open. They're the richest people in the world and in the country are the people that are your deep state. But they're not secret. They're out in the open. If you think that there's another organization that's telling Elon Musk what to do, you're out of your mind, okay? Elon Musk is probably the richest person in the world. You know, there's some princes and possibly Putin that might be richer, but they don't disclose their... But anyway, there's not another secret organization that has more power. Because if there was a deep state, Elon Musk would own them too, okay? Elon Musk has enough money to be the leader of the world, basically. And that's what he basically just did when he won the presidency, well, you know, with Trump.
To undermine this whole notion of a working class, and absolutely to undermine working class solidarity. The fact that Walmart refuses to call its workers, calls them associates. The fact that Uber and Lyft do not want to call their drivers workers, they call them independent contractors.
Oh yeah, Uber. The Uber was saying, "Oh, we have fire Ubers for the people in LA that were supposedly you could call a fire Uber and they would come and get you and take you to safety." I'm sorry, Uber, but you don't get to take credit for that. You just have an app. It's the people that are signing up for it that are the heroes, and the people, you just have an app. You're not like, you didn't hire specific people to be fire Uber people. You just were like, hey, look, people are using our app to be rescuers. We're awesome, aren't we? No, you're not awesome. You're not awesome, Uber.
Which is a misnomer and is a direct assault on their workers' rights, because as independent contractors, they are not allowed minimum wage. They are not allowed.
Starbucks workers are partners. You didn't know that.
That's right.
They and Howard Schultz are partners making billions together. How do you like that?
But when Amazon workers organize in Staten Island, and when Starbucks workers organize in more than 100 Starbucks locations around the country, the corporate union busters are right there to do all they can to undermine their workers' democratic right to form and join unions. And so this whole obfuscation of class solidarity is critical. One thing that I do want to point out, and Brother Cornel West has raised this, that public education was fought for and won by the labor movement, and higher education, especially public colleges and universities.
Bernie, if you need any help technically, please let me know. I would love to go and help you out. This muting in between speakers is not necessary. It does not have to exist. Okay, it doesn't. And this freezing and stuff, I mean, I do a podcast. We never have freezing, hardly ever, unless these people are up in the mountains somewhere. Please contact me. Please. I would love to help you. Free, by the way. I would just adore it.
Are paid for by working class tax dollars. And so 2 weeks ago, we secured a huge victory that is a victory for the working class. We have now received a $13 million annual augmentation as a result of the leadership and courage of State Senator Maria Elena Durazo for advancing this initiative in order to expand and grow 9 labor centers throughout the University of California system in the coming months. So I guarantee you the things that Cornel West were talking about in terms of growing a working class culture, growing a media and communications profile for the needs of workers, that these are things that we will be putting into place in the coming months.
I just want to reiterate, I don't know why, I think Cornel made the point, maybe Kent made it, that I'll give you an example, fresh on my mind, very fresh. I submitted an op-ed to CNN, and it was on an issue we're dealing with right now at this moment, is that Congress is about to give $52 billion in corporate welfare to the microchip industry with no strings attached, just a free check. And I raised concerns wrote an op-ed about it, and CNN said, yeah, I like it, except you got to put in a paragraph telling us about all the good things that Intel has done. Okay, in other words, they have to protect their corporate interests, so we're not going to have an op-ed there. I want to get back to another point. I want to get back to 2 points. And maybe, Cornel, you jump in on this one. I don't think there is much knowledge in this country about the role that progressive trade unionism played, not only in the civil rights struggle, but even before that, that you had unions that were reasonably well integrated before that became socially acceptable. Cornel, talk a little bit about the role of unions, fighting racism, civil rights movement.
Well, one is that anytime you talk about Black people, Asians, you talk about Spanish people, Mexicans, or Latinos, you're talking about people who are overwhelmingly working people. So that you already, from the very beginning, must be able to think simultaneously the fact that women dominated, subjugated, the majority of women, working people. Black folks that way, Asians the same way. So that even when we talk about intersectionality, I know that's a very fashionable term, and I love my dear sister Kimberly Crenshaw very deeply. But if you understand it solely in an abstract spatial way, rather than concretely in the bodies, in the lived experiences of everyday people, you're going to think it's something just added on, this plus this plus this. No, it's simultaneously in the very lived experience of folks. So that, for example, Brother Ken has just been working with for many, many years, the great James Lawson, who goes hand in hand with Fannie Lou Hamer, who goes hand in hand with Martin Luther King Jr. Why is James Lawson such a powerful force for good based on vision and courage when it comes to the labor movement, when it comes to struggles against white supremacy, struggles against male supremacy, struggles against homophobia? And he's a Christian minister. Well, he's got certain moral orientations. He looks at the world through a certain way, and he's in solidarity with struggling people in a courageous way. And therefore, when we talk about the labor movement and struggles against racism and sexism, we would add imperialism too, in terms of what America's done in Latin America and various parts of the world. We have these exemplars. And one of the great things about these labor studies is people can see things more clearly when they see exemplary movements, exemplary institutions, and exemplary individuals who looked at the world differently than the mainstream. CNN, MSNBC, we won't even talk about Fox News in terms of the ugliness there, but we're talking about mainstream perception.
On that one. Dana, you've been silent for 7 minutes. Jump in.
Yeah, I can definitely say something here. Coming from the Gilded Age, whenever you see so much division along ethnic and racial lines, you do see labor organizations trying to cobble together some sort of unity among the working class, kind of like what Dr. West is talking about here. And you have two competing perspectives almost. On one hand, from non-white workers, from women workers, they see organizations like the labor unions that they join as a vehicle to achieve not just workplace justice, but broader social change too. And so you see workers calling on organizations to take a stand on things like lynching and take a stand on things like legalized segregation, which happened in the Gilded Age. And so you see these workers expecting the unions to take a stand on these issues, but at the same time, these unions aren't immune to the the racism of the time period. And so while they have the rank and file that are pushing for all these changes, you also see the union leadership kind of pulling on the reins saying, whoa, wait a minute. I don't know if we want to get involved in that fight. We just want to work on the working conditions. And so it's trying to find that foothold in the Gilded Age made things very, very difficult. And that continued into the Progressive era as well.
Yeah, it's hard to get all the segregated people together fighting for one cause because so many of them have prejudice against each other. It's amazing.
My impression is that in the 40s and the 50s, 60s, there were a lot of unions who were actively involved in the fight against segregation and racism. And that there was a reason why Dr. King often spoke to labor unions. What am I missing here? Is that correct? Kent?
What you said is absolutely true, that in the 1960s, and Brother Cornel West lifted up the extraordinary contributions of Reverend James Lawson Jr., who was a leader of the Memphis sanitation workers strike that brought together the civil rights movement and the labor movement around a common agenda. So indeed, you had many progressive labor leaders back in the 1960s who aligned with broader issues of civil rights against segregation and for human liberation. So there have always been those trends within the labor movement that have embraced a social justice vision for the future. What Dana said is also true, that there have been more conservative forces within the labor movement, and they exist to this day, that have shied away from taking positions on issues like reproductive justice, issues like LGBTQ rights, issues like immigrant rights, because they say that those go beyond the scope of what we need to be focused on as a labor movement, and that we should only focus on bread and butter issues of our members. In my view, the finest hour of unions, the finest hour of the labor movement is when they have embraced a broader notion of social justice unionism that understands that the liberation of all people is a just demand that unions must uphold to ensure that all workers are liberated.
Class wars. That's what it is. Everyone, all the segregated people need to get together and realize, as George Carlin said it, there's a club. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. Segregated communities, women, Black people, Native Americans, Asians, Spanish, everyone. Now, the reason why you know that it's separated like that is because as soon as you give one of those people lots of money, Oprah, they jump to a different class. Like, Oprah's not going to be segregated against because she's a woman or a Black woman. No way. She's super rich. And that is the proof. And there's tons of examples like that. But that's the proof that it's really the ultra wealthy against all of us.
Anything you want to add to this?
Let me build a little bit on what Kent's saying. Labor unions, as he said, there are conservative elements within the labor movement. But to build on this question of immigrant rights, for a period of time in the 60s and 70s, labor unions, including Cesar Chavez, were in favor of deportation and using the INS to get rid of Mexican immigrant workers. It took the work of progressive organizers within the labor movement, within the communities, to help unions articulate and understand that they needed to organize people regardless of their citizenship status. So there really is an important role for people who have a progressive vision to engage with organized labor, which is one of the few institutions in society that brings people together who don't necessarily like each other. They just happen to be working in the same place. And that gives unions the possibility of really changing people's minds through the unionization process, through fighting together for things that we need, that all of us need.
Let me jump in here. I'm thinking back, we did a live stream many months ago. During the last couple of years, my office has been working with a number of unions, often unions that were on strike, and we try to provide the little help that we could. And we did a live stream like this. And we had, as I recall, workers on strike in Alabama. We had workers, mostly Latino, on strike in a bakery in Los Angeles. I don't know, Kent, if you're familiar with that. That was Rich Products, I think, out there in LA. We had workers in West Virginia on strike. We had a Starbucks worker who was organizing, whatever it was. And what was a beautiful thing to see is people nodding their heads when the other guy was talking. The same experience of corporate greed, trying to crush workers, take away their health care, deny them, decent benefits. Talk to me, what I see and what I've seen in the last couple of years getting involved in these strikes is the importance of solidarity. I was just there's a terrible strike going on right now. The company named CNH and they're in Racine, Wisconsin, and they're in Burlington, Iowa. Bad news strike. They really want to significantly reduce the healthcare benefits of their workers. Many of them worked really hard during the pandemic. And it was just a beautiful thing to see. We did a rally. It's like 93 degrees out in Iowa. And these workers from the John Deere company, who had previously been on strike, came to express their solidarity with these workers. And this solidarity is I know we got a philosopher among us right here, but it's a very profound statement. And what these guys were feeling and saying, without the union, we would be alone. And not only that, we're getting help from workers all across the country. We can't make it on $200 a week strike benefit. And we're getting checks coming from other international unions. So I think that is not just a bread and butter issue. It is the sense that in a very difficult world, you're not alone. And I think that's fairly profound. All right, Mr. Philosopher, Cornel, what do you think?
You said it, fellow philosopher. I'm telling you. Solidarity says, I see you. I feel your pain, and I'm willing to take a risk to do something about it. I can't do it by myself. I can't do it alone. I've got to do it with others and in relation to you, human to human. See, that's why the trade union movement has always been the most profoundly humanistic effort in a predatory capitalist civilization to be committed to truth. The condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. Here is our suffering and justice. You're going to lose your democracy if you don't treat working people fairly and allow them to have a voice.
There's a really great show on Apple TV called Silo. And one of the things I found very interesting about that show, I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but basically it's a giant silo in the ground, and the class wars in Silo are the people on the lowest levels are the workers who keep the silo working and moving. And as you go up, eventually you get to the top, that's where the richest or the highest class is. One of the things I thought was interesting about it is everybody in the silo, well, not everybody, most of the people in the silo, as far as the majority of them believe, are have no memory of what happened before they were in the silo. Not them, but their ancestors even. Like, as far as they know, something happened in the before times, and then everybody went into the silo because of the outside is not inhabitable. So far, I have not given any spoilers. But the one thing I thought was really interesting about the show is there's no racism. And the reason why there isn't any is because all the people have had their memories basically, I'm not saying like they were erased. That's not a spoiler. Their memories might as well be erased because they all have generations growing up in this silo where there's a lower class and there's a higher class, and color and gender, none of that matters. And well, through that, you get solidarity at the lower levels. It's a great show. You need to watch it. Go ahead, Cornel.
And shaping their destiny. That to me is the best of the trade union movement, which to me is just the best of a humanistic movement. It's just that because it's a predatory capitalist society, you need a class analysis. Because it's a racist society, you need an analysis of white supremacy. It's a sexist one, you need an analysis of gender. It's a settler colonial one, we have to be in solidarity with our indigenous brothers and sisters. So that's part and parcel of exactly what you just said. I can't say it any better, my brother.
And you always do.
you already said it.
All right, who else wants to jump in? I think this issue of solidarity, human solidarity, is so bloody profound. Kent, what do you?
I totally connect with your call for solidarity, Bernie. I really connected with your call, Cornel, for hope. And we need a worker-centered economy. We currently reside in a corporate-centered economy, a corporate-centered economy that is driving a race to the bottom in terms of wages and working conditions.
The problem is that the only people watching this are on the left wing. The right wing aren't watching this. The right wing aren't getting this same message. How do we get the right wing to go, I don't like the blacks, but let's take care of the rich first so we can argue about the stupid shit later. Because like there's a first step before you can get into whether or not you think America should be a white country or not. It doesn't matter what you think. MAGA, right wing, it doesn't matter what you think. It matters what the rich think. So you're not even able to make changes that you want to make. Thank goodness. However, you're also not able to make changes that you want because it's not what you think. What you believe, what you want the country to be, it'll either happen by happenstance because The people that are rich happen to believe in the same thing that you do, which a lot of them do, which I think is part of the problem also. But the right wing are taught that whole like yeah, well, I'm American, I had to take 3 jobs to make my to put food on the table, then I do it. I don't bitch about it and ask for a handout. Yeah, but you don't have to do that. Why are you so romanticized about this 3-job bullshit? You live in the richest country ever on the planet. I think it's okay if we spread it out a little bit and everybody has at least the basics covered, you know? Oops, talking about socialism there. Go on, Ken.
A corporate economy that is denying climate change and eliminating practical steps that will save our planet. A corporate economy that is fueling the...
Again, this is streamed 2 years ago. They don't know about Trump becoming president. They also don't know about Gaza yet. They don't know about the California fires. There's a lot.
Gun culture that is blocking any passage of meaningful gun control, a corporate economy that is ripping to shreds the rights of women and reproductive justice. So we need a worker-centered economy that can truly fulfill the solidarity message that Bernie is bringing and the message of hope that Cornel is bringing.
Danny, you want to jump in on that one? Solidarity.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think just kind of echo what everybody else has already said so beautifully, so much better than what I could say. I think there's just something so powerful about seeing so many voices together kind of echoing the same kind of message. You know, we live in an age where everybody has their smartphone handy and we're always distracted by the next sound bit and the next, scandal of who's doing what when. And I think whenever you have so many people standing together saying, hey, this is an issue, let's not forget that, it kind of forces everybody to focus in on what is being said instead of being drowned out by everything else that's going on. And I think that that's a really, really powerful thing to harness, especially whenever we face so many challenges. So that's the big thing that I'd like to add.
Yeah, but how do we harness it and then keep it? The distractions. It's so many distractions.
Add here.
Okay, Toby, jump in on solidarity. What does it mean?
Well, it's movement, and that's one of the reasons why, of course, the anthem of the movement is Solidarity Forever, written in 1915 by Ralph Chaplin, who was a young man who grew up on a Kansas farm and became a migrant worker, and then got involved in one of the most dynamic and radical transformative union movements of the time. It's an aspiration, it's a reminder, it's a prayer for all of us in a sense. And when union people sing it together, they feel solidarity in their bodies. And that is the kind of transformative thing that Cornel West is talking about. That it is embodied, it is spiritual, and it's in our minds. It changes our minds and helps us see a different world.
All right. Who wants to jump in with any parting thoughts?
A beautiful cacophony of voices. The Black national anthem is lift every voice, and these voices lifted today put a smile on Brother Martin Luther King Jr.'s face. Let alone W.B. Du Bois and Paul Robeson, and we haven't even got the Vito Marcantonio yet. I mean, here we go.
Sure would like to know what Bernie said there.
I'd say that I really wanted to give a shout out to Bernie Sanders, to Cornel West, for inspiring a new generation of young activists who are following you, following your leadership, following your vision for a society filled with more hope and justice. And so millions of young people all around the world have been inspired by you, Cornel West, and by you, Bernie Sanders.
And thank you for the great work.
We're inspired by you, Sister Dana.
You should have seen us on the campaign trail. I had to follow this guy all over the place. All right, listen, I just want to thank you all for the great work you're doing. I think if there is a bright spot in a very difficult moment in American history, it is the degree, and Kent and others were talking about it, that the American people are beginning to understand they've got to come together to fight for dignity, actually, and unions are an important way to do that. And it's just inspiring to me to see so many young people learn about trade unions and prepared to take on corporate greed. So let me thank the 4 of you very much. I enjoyed this live stream and look forward to continuing the discussion with you. All right, thank you all very much for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Okay. Let's oh, whoops, wrong place. Here we go. Okay. Now let's just make sure that I covered everything. Let's read those again. Let's see. Who are the key actors in the movement and what are their roles? So journalists, politicians, lawyers. I think we talked about that. I mean, I didn't specifically mention all the roles, but I think we talked about it. Oh, we did. We talked about. We didn't really talk about journalists very much. We talked about politicians and lawyers because we were talking about. We talked about how that nowadays they use law, but I think that the thugs are going to start coming out. Journalists, that's just a given. I mean, um, media companies are purchased, and they're going to say whatever their owners tell them to say, or they get fired. Even people that are like super like popular, I mean, they just get fired if all right. What similarities do you see between the time period in the source and today? We definitely talked about that. What differences do you see between the time period in the source and today? So the similarities and differences we definitely talked about. What lessons can be learned from this era of movement building and applied to today? What lessons can be learned from this era of movement? What lessons can be learned from this era of movement building and applied to today? What lessons can be learned from this era? Maybe it was the era before. The lessons are, well, it's the poor against the rich. It's the middle class against the rich. You think you're middle upper class, but you're not. There's two classes. There's the rulers, the kings, and then there's the rest of us. So yeah, thank you for watching. I'm gonna go and get my homework finished for Leisha and go into her Patreon, and have a little discussion. If you don't know who Leisha Miller is, I'll definitely link it in the description. And yeah, thank you very much. Please hit subscribe, and maybe that will entice me to do more videos. All right. Yeah, that's pretty much it. All right. See you next time.